Welcome to Passion Week at Home. I am Justin and this is my wife Kim, and we are going to be talking about Good Friday. Today is Good Friday, and the verses that we want you to read tonight are John 18 and John 19. We're going to highlight some of the high points, or actually low points, in Good Friday.
Yeah.
And why do we call it Good Friday? On the surface, everything looks bad that happens on Good Friday. Jesus was betrayed by Judas, and Peter denies him 3 times. He was crucified, then he was buried. All on Friday that they call good.
Yeah, so when we first started going through these verses together, my question was, why do we call this Good Friday? And everything that happens, like Justin said, is bad. And when we started reading through them, it's like, okay, this is all really bad stuff that happens. And so as a Christian, why do we call this day Good Friday? And so one quote that we had was, at a glance, Good Friday is a terrible day. But with a different perspective, Good Friday is a good day because it allows for the miracle of Sunday. So looking at these verses through a different perspective allows us to see the goodness that we can find in these scriptures. So we'll start with John chapter 18, verse 1. When he had finished praying, Jesus left with his disciples and crossed the Kidron Valley. On the other side there was a garden, and he and his disciples went into it. Now Judas, who betrayed him, knew the place because Jesus had often met there with his disciples. So Judas came to the garden, guiding a detachment of soldiers and some officials from the chief priests and the Pharisees. They were carrying torches, lanterns, and weapons. Jesus, knowing all that was going to happen to him, went out and asked them, "Who is it you want?" "Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. "I am he," Jesus said, and Judas the traitor was standing there with them. When Jesus said, "I am he," they drew back and fell to the ground.
Verse 4 says, Jesus knowing what was going to happen to him. That shows me that Jesus knew his purpose. There was disruption coming to everyone's lives right then. People were coming to get Jesus, and because Jesus knew his purpose, it didn't slow him down any. The disciples, however...
Yeah, so the disciples, these are men that had given up everything that they knew. They left their families and their homelands to follow Jesus. So when he was arrested, their lives went into a state of disruption. And it's interesting here when you look at that, when you look at today, what's happening in the world, everyone's life has kind of went into this state of disruption right now. And so I think it's important to know, just because your life is disrupted, it doesn't mean your purpose has. So just because Jesus's life was disrupted, his purpose did not change. So let's pick up with verse 15.
Simon Peter and another disciple were following Jesus. Because this disciple was known to the high priest, he went with Jesus into the high priest's courtyard. But Peter had to wait outside at the door. The other disciple, who was known to the high priest, came back, spoke to the girl on duty there, and brought Peter in. "You are not one of his disciples, are you?" the girl at the door asked Peter. He replied, "I am not."
And then verse 25.
As Simon Peter stood warming himself, he was asked, "Are you not one of the disciples?" He denied it, saying, "I am not." One of the high priest's servants, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had cut off, challenged him, "Didn't I see you with him in the olive grove?" Again Peter denied it, and at that moment a rooster began to crow.
So I think it's interesting here when you compare and contrast what's happening. So Peter goes with Jesus and another disciple to this high court, to the high priest, and Jesus goes inside and he's being questioned by the high priest, and Peter's kind of waiting outside in the courtyard, and someone asks him, "Are you a disciple of Jesus?" And he says, "No, I'm not." 3 times he says no. Even when someone questions, "Didn't we just see you with him in the garden?" No,
Nope.
that wasn't me.
Wasn't me.
So I think here Peter is scared. His life has been thrown into chaos, and instead of taking that and looking outwardly, he looks inwardly. And who wouldn't? how does this affect me? Am I going to be arrested? Am I going to be put on trial? And so he takes it inward and focuses everything on himself instead of focusing on, Jesus told the disciples this was going to happen. And for whatever, he's human. He turns it on himself and focuses on himself. And I think it's important for us in times of disruption to not do the same thing. So today, right now, with everything that's going on in the world, there are ways we can look outward. We're all focusing right now, how do we protect our families and how do we worry about ourselves? But we can find ways to serve the community and reach out to people in need, whether that's go get groceries for people or just call them and say, how are you doing? We need to find ways to shine the light instead of turning it inward on ourselves.
Yeah, it didn't go the way Peter thought it was going to go. Jesus told him it was going to go this way, but he thought Jesus was going to fight. So in the garden, Peter's going to fight. And when that didn't happen and Jesus pretty much looked like he gave up, Peter didn't know what to do. So he went crazy.
Yeah. So let's pick up John 18, verse 28.
Then the Jews led Jesus from Caiaphas to the place of the Roman governor. By now it was early morning, and to avoid ceremonial uncleanness, the Jews did not enter the palace. They wanted to be able to eat the Passover. So Pilate came out and asked them, "What charges are you bringing against this man?" "If he were not a criminal," they replied, "we would not have handed him over to you." Pilate said, "Take him yourselves and judge him by your own laws." "But we have no right to execute anyone," the Jews objected. This happened so that the words of Jesus that he had spoken, indicating the kind of death he was going to die, would be fulfilled. Pilate then went back inside the palace, summoned Jesus, and asked him, "Are you the king of the Jews?" "Is that your own idea?" Jesus asked, "or did others talk to you about me?" "Am I a Jew?" Pilate replied. "It was your people and your chief priest who handed you over to me. What is it you have done?" Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would fight to prevent my arrest by the Jews, but now my kingdom is from another place." "You are a king then," Pilate said. Jesus answered, "You are right in saying I am a king. In fact, for this reason I was born, and for this I came into the world, to testify to the truth. Everyone on the side of truth listens to me." "What is truth?" Pilate asked. With this he went out again to the Jews and said, "I find no basis for a charge against this man. But it is your custom for me to release one prisoner at the time of Passover. Do you want me to release the king of the Jews?" They shouted back, "No, not him. Give us Barabbas."
So as we read through this is Jesus before Pilate. And for a little context, Jerusalem was taken over by the Roman Empire. So these Jewish leaders, they're who went to the garden to arrest Jesus, and they took him to their high court first, to their high priest, and after that they took him to the Roman governor, Pilate, for a trial, because under their laws they couldn't execute anyone because they were under this Roman Empire. So they take him to Pilate and they're like, "Okay, Pilate, we have these charges against this man." And they really had 3 different charges that they were bringing against Jesus. The first charge was causing civil unrest, disrupting the peace, causing, threatening the Roman rule. The second charge was that Jesus was telling people not to pay their taxes. And the third charge was really the one that has the most truth to it. And that was that Jesus was claiming to be the king over Israel, which anytime you're under another king and you claim to be king, then you're, usurping that authority and saying, "I am the king." So they bring Jesus to Pilate, and he says, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus, and if you look at verse 37, I think this is the key takeaway from this reading portion. Jesus answered, "You say that I am a king. In fact, the reason I was born and came into the world is to testify to the truth." What Jesus is saying there is, I was born to do this. This is my purpose. This is what I'm on the earth to do.
Yeah, he knew his purpose, and he was okay with everything that was about to happen to him because he continued to be in his purpose.
Let's move forward. John 19, verse 1. Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They clothed him in a purple robe and went up to him again and again, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they slapped him in the face. Once more Pilate came out and said to the Jews gathered there, "Look, I am bringing him out to you to let you know that I find no basis for a charge against him." When Jesus came out wearing the crown of thorns and the purple robe, Pilate said to them, "Here is the man." As soon as the chief priests and their officials saw him, they shouted, "Crucify, crucify." But Pilate answered, "You take him and crucify him. As for me, I find no basis for a charge against him." The Jewish leaders insisted, "We have a law, and according to that law, he must die because he claimed to be the Son of God." When Pilate heard this, he was even more afraid, and he went back inside the palace. "Where do you come from?" he asked Jesus. But Jesus gave him no answer. "Do you refuse to speak to me?" Pilate said. "Don't you realize I have power either to free you or to crucify you?" Jesus answered, "You would have no power over me if it were not given to you from above. Therefore, the one who handed me over to you is guilty of a greater sin." From then on, Pilate tried to set Jesus free, but the Jewish leaders kept shouting, "If you let this man go, you are no friend of Caesar. Anyone who claims to be a king opposes Caesar." When Pilate heard this, he brought Jesus out and sat down on the judge's seat at a place known as the Stone Pavement. It was the day of preparation of the Passover, about noon. "Here is your king," Pilate said to the Jews. But they shouted, take him away, crucify him." "Shall I crucify your king?" Pilate asked. "We have no king but Caesar," the chief priests answered. Finally, Pilate handed him over to them to be crucified.
It seems like Pilate didn't even want to crucify him, but the Jews had basically backed him into a corner by saying, "Crucify him, crucify him."
Yeah, they gave him no option. I mean, they painted him into this corner of, he's claiming to be the king.
Yeah.
We have no king but Caesar. And Pilate served Caesar. I mean, he was appointed by Caesar. So he was trying to give them the opportunity to free Jesus because I think Pilate truly felt like he was innocent. He knew this was an unfair trial. And
even Jesus had to make Pilate ask him over and over again different questions and everything, and told Pilate, "You couldn't kill me if you wanted to if I didn't let you."
Right.
So Jesus could have stopped right there and said, talk Pilate out of it pretty easily, I'm pretty sure.
Okay, so verse 19. The soldiers took charge of Jesus. Carrying his own cross, he went out to the place of the skull, which in Aramaic is called Golgotha. There they crucified him, and with him 2 others, one on each side, and Jesus in the middle. Pilate had a notice prepared and fastened to the cross. It read, "Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews." Many of the Jews read this sign, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and the sign was written in Aramaic, Latin, and Greek. The chief priests of the Jews protested to Pilate, "Do not write the King of the Jews, but that this man claimed to be King of the Jews." Pilate answered, "What I have written, I have written."
Later, knowing that all was now completed, and so that the scripture would be fulfilled, Jesus said, "I am thirsty." A jar of wine vinegar was there, so they soaked a sponge in it. They put the sponge on the stalk of the hyssop plant and lifted it to Jesus' lips. When he had received the drink, Jesus said, "It is finished." With that, he bowed his head and gave up his spirit. Jesus knew his purpose at that moment was done.
Right. So verse 30, when he says the 3 words, "It is finished," that's a really simple sentence. 3 words that if you use them in everyday language, doesn't have a lot of meaning. But the significance of that sentence for us as Christians has impacts on millions of people worldwide. Because in that moment, when Jesus declared, "It is finished," he indicated that his work, his purpose of salvation was fulfilled. He came to do what we couldn't do. He died on the cross for our sins. And that cross is it's so much more than just a man suffering. It's more than a man being abandoned by his friends, betrayed by his friends, denied. It's about Jesus dying on the cross in our place, dying a death that we all deserve to die because we are sinners. And so when we talk about Good Friday, this sentence is what makes it good, because nothing else can happen unless this happens. So today, if you are in a place where you would say, I don't know if I believe it was finished. If you need someone to talk to, if you're in this state of disruption in the world and you just need someone to talk to about what's going on, you want someone to pray with you, we're going to put some phone numbers up at the end of the message that you can text and call, and someone will pray with you and talk to you about whatever, if it's salvation, if it's you just need prayer in a situation, whatever it is, someone will reach out to you and help you through that.
Yeah.
So we've went through these, things: Judas betraying Jesus, Peter denying Jesus, Jesus' trial and sentencing, his crucifixion. And in order to set the stage for Sunday, we're going to read two more scriptures about the burial of Jesus. We'll pick up in 19, verse 41.
At the place where Jesus was crucified, there was a garden, and in the garden a new tomb in which no one had ever been laid. Because it was a Jewish day of preparation, and since the tomb was nearby, they laid Jesus there.
So that concludes our reading, and we want to just encourage you. We've went through this entire week, Passion Week at home, and we've read these scriptures. We want to encourage you to take Friday evening and tomorrow, Saturday, and just reflect on what happened this week, what Jesus has done for you. Reflect on the death of Jesus as his victory, as fulfillment of his purpose, not as, a bad thing that happened. Yes, it was bad, but it is good.
It happened for a reason. And if it didn't happen, we wouldn't all be here.
Right. So think of his death as the victory, a victory that's going to be unveiled on Easter Sunday. Pastor Randy has a message for us on Sunday, and it is a good message to conclude the week.
Spoiler alert. He gets out.